Hey everyone, welcome back to the layout once again. Today we have a short little layout update for you. Typically I've been uploading my layout construction video series on Tuesday, and by typically I mean like the last 3 or 4 weeks, I forget what it is. We're only on episode 3. There are supposed to be like 18 to 20 of them, and these videos document all the changes on the layout since it was called the Plains Division over the last like 18, 20 or so months. Last Wednesday I had kind of a scare. I dumped a bunch of tea into my computer that had upwards of 900 individual video clips from that time period on it. So I thought I had lost everything because I'm an idiot and I didn't have it all backed up. So the computer's toast, but I was able to get the videos off. And anyway, that's why I don't have this week's episode edited. So expect into the future I'll continue that regular video series that will be on a weekly release schedule, but this week I don't for obvious reasons. But nonetheless, there are a couple things that are happening on the layout that I just wanted to show you and talk about. So I figured it'd be worth it to do a quick little layout update. So let's take a look at a couple things. All right, first order of business is the trees over here at Blacktail. So if you watched my layout update 2023 video, which just kind of summarizes all the changes on the layout since the previous update in 2021, one of the things that I mentioned is that some of the trees that I installed on the upper level, like over at Essex, I put new flock material on, and by flock I'm referring to the static grass that goes onto the tree armatures, as well as some ground cover material. So you can see there's like static grass and some ground foam of various colors on there. Well, anyway, when I initially made these trees, I only did like one or at most 2 light layers of that. And I was making them outside, and I think maybe the wood glue, not the wood glue, excuse me, the spray glue that I was using because it was super humid, didn't adhere very well, or maybe because it was hot it also cured quickly. So by the time I got the trees down to the layout and I started poking them into the paper here, the vibration of installing them knocked a lot of the flock off, and they looked kind of bare. You can kind of see, like, if we turn this way, the 3 trees that I left over here, these are kind of how they turned out. These were actually some of the better looking ones, so that's why I left these and I did not reflock these, because I feel like a few of them should be a bit more bare. But when they all looked like this or worse, it wasn't a good look. And you can see in this corner where there used to be some of those trees, how much material they dropped. So anyway, I ripped all of the trees that were over here in this aisle out, and then I re-spray glued them, reapplied the static flock, and you can see that things look a bit more full. So if you go back to that layout update 2023 video, you can have a good frame of reference for how things look different, and I am happy with the changes here. One of the other things that I'm doing is working on updating my fascia signage. So if we take a look over here, I have signage for all of the significant control points and turnouts on the main line. So like here, this is the switch that swings off of basically what is the siding at Columbia Falls here, and that is the reverse loop down into the west end of Whitefish Yard. And so you'll see I have on here that this is labeled South Siding Switch, Columbia Falls. It's a manual control switch, so this is not dispatcher controlled, and it just has some information on here. But one of the things you'll notice too is that I've put mileposts on there, and these mileposts originally were based on the prototype timetable information, and I just tried to pick mileposts that were as close to these features as possible. So in this case, I just looked at the mileposts that are around Columbia Falls on the prototype, and I chose this number. And then of course, accordingly, west siding switch Columbia Falls over here is a little bit further, right? So this is 1211.8, south siding switch is 1211.6. And where I'm going with this is that those mileposts are not very useful to the operator. Because, for example, at Columbia Falls here, excuse me for the lighting, if we're going to do some switching, you'll see it's a very short siding. So we've got a switch right there. This is also manual control. So the Columbia Falls local might come up here, and they'll go onto the siding here. They'll throw this switch away from what is designated as main track 2. So that's main 2 operation, normal mainline operation right there. But they might get a track warrant to operate at Columbia Falls, and then they'll use this siding here for runaround maneuvers. But if I'm the dispatcher and I want to give the local crew a work between order, typically what you would do is say work between this milepost and that milepost. As it is right now, I only have mileposts marked on the major features like East Siding Switch Columbia Falls, and because they're made up and they're not in any sort of scale mile, this 1211.2 for to go around the peninsula and jump over to Belton, I forget what it is on there, but it's some random number, which means that unless I give a track warrant all the way up around the corner to Belton, which is unnecessary, there's no features beyond those 2 points on the layout that you can reference if you're an operator. You can only really reference mileposts that are listed on the fascia cards. But again, these are just kind of random. They're not any sort of scale mile. So 1156 up here, 1211.2 there. I'm not traversing an actual like 55 miles, even scale miles, obviously. So what I've decided to do is scrap those numbers that you see on those fascia panels. I have printed out pieces of paper that will cover these, and on my track plan, starting from a reasonable milepost down at Whitefish, which is sort of like the base of the grade, I'm working numerically in scale miles that are quarter scale miles. So my train lengths, right, if we go over to Whitefish right now, which for some reason, the lights are not working right now, so apologies, but I use the 25% rule, which is a rule I just made up for myself based on Grant Eastman's 40% rule. So his train lengths are 40% of the prototype. So if it's a 100-car train, it will be 40 cars on the layout. In my case, if I have a 100-car train, it's going to be 25 cars. So like this coal train here is 26. So that would on the prototype be over 100 cars. I think the grain train, at least at this moment, the way it's set up technically is right now as well. And then the oil train as well is 26 cars in length. But because the trains are 25% of prototype length, I'm also making the mileposts 25% of a scale mile. So this brings me to my point, which is that I've made these little fascia cards. They're actually just paper right now, so I might stiffen them up. But you'll see starting with milepost 1218, that'll go down in Whitefish, and then 1217, and so on and so forth until we get to the top of the grade. I'm going to install those on the fascia every quarter scale mile, so that then if you're the Columbia Falls local or a road freight and you have any sort of track warrant that needs to reference a milepost, the milepost will actually be listed on the fascia. And eventually, when I get details and stuff installed, I'll also have milepost signs trackside. So in addition to installing mile markers or mileposts on the fascia at scale, 25% scale intervals, I'm also considering the use of speed restrictions or speed limits for road freights on the main line, just to make the road operator's job a bit more dynamic. And so I've gone through my track plan and I've started to assign what to me seem like prototype speed limits based on the timetable from the Highline subdivision. So the section of track here through Belton, across the bridge and through the tunnels is probably going to be something like 45 miles per hour, whereas the climb up through the Shed District at the steepest part of the grade, up closer to Mariah Summit, that'll be like 25 mile per hour track. And so to make that interesting, I'm planning on doing two things. One, I think it'd be cool to have those speed signs posted on the fascia, just like the mileposts are. But additionally, I've reprogrammed all of my locomotives to have very little load compensation. And what that means is that for a given throttle setting, say 60% throttle, when you're going upgrade with a full length train, the locomotives, the motors, really feel that load and they slow down. And so the decoder doesn't give the engine any extra juice to deal with that, and so the train slows down. If you maintain that exact same throttle setting, but in the opposite direction coming downgrade, the train goes a lot faster. So if you're the road operator, road crew on one of these mainline freights, you have to think about the grade itself as well as the speed limit so that you're not sending your train down through Blacktail at 60 miles per hour when it's a 25 mile per hour speed restriction. But if you're going upgrade at the exact same throttle setting, you very well may be within that speed restriction. So that's just something that adds a little extra fun and that I hope to incorporate into the operations a bit more in the future. And the final operational tidbit that I've kind of been toying around with is exactly how to use the helpers. So on the prototype, Essex up here is the real helper base. I've kind of been learning a bit of information from people who are chiming in, and I did know that Essex was the helper base, but for the sake of enhancing the length of the helper run, for a while I was messing around with adding helpers down here in Whitefish. And that is sort of fun, but Whitefish is such a busy area of the layout. And again, the lights aren't on right now, they typically are. But it's basically staging for the layout, right? I have no actual staging yard, so all the unit trains roll through here at Whitefish, and if the dispatcher is doing a bad job of moving trains up and down the grade and it's unbalanced, you're gonna have a parking lot here, basically. And so in addition to all the switching that goes on in the yard, trying to get returning helpers from one end of the yard to the other end to attach to the rear of these unit trains really was a bottleneck. And part of that is fun, but part of it also feels limiting. And so to keep the flow of traffic going, I've reverted back to adding helpers here at Essex like they do on the prototype. And so I've been having a lot of fun basically using the auxiliary siding, which is the third track in the back behind the main lines, basically as a helper pocket. So the helper set, couple of GEs sits there when an eastbound road freight rolls up past the West Essex crossover and then brings it to a stop. Then those helpers will roll out onto the main line, getting permission from the dispatcher to enter main track, and then they will back past the west switch of the auxiliary siding and hook up to the rear of the eastbound train. And one thing that I also had not incorporated into operations before is cutting off helpers on the fly. They do use HelperLink on these helper sets out of Essex, as far as I know. The same was true of Crawford Hill back when I modeled that, but I never really incorporated that into the operations. But it's a lot of fun to cut the helpers off on the fly. So basically, they start the push here from Essex, and they work their way all the way up the grade, and they come here to, once they clear west siding switch Marias here, they're pretty much close to Summit. There's a peak in the grade right about there. And so right before they get to the peak, the helper crew, with the couplers offset so that they're not actually coupled, you can just crank back the throttle, and then the helper set comes to a stop like on the prototype, and then they can very quickly roll back down to Essex and be ready for the next eastbound. So that's just something I've been messing around with. I know operationally that some people will shave off the knuckles on their helper set couplers. So that's something that I'll probably do just because I just started messing around with this. So I've been offsetting the couplers for fun, but that's probably the system that I will adopt like others have. Well, that is it for the ramblings this time. Again, I'm a little thrown off right now because of the computer issue, but I will get that sorted here shortly and get back to normal programming. So thank you for bearing with me in this video, which I edited on my phone. I hope it wasn't too bad. But yeah, again, appreciate you stopping in. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you next time.